Okay, Kitsiksimatsimokboa. This is going to be a lecture on the plant and animal behaviors and characteristics that are typical of the lunar cycle Misamsootaa, the long rains. This is part of my Blackfoot Phenology course series. Misamsootaa is, in most years, the second lunar cycle of summer. It spans from really the first crescent of the new moon that occurs in the latter part of June, typically, and then goes into July. The summer solstice occurs during this lunar cycle. But what it's really known for, of course, and why it's named Misamsootaa, the long rains, is because this is the time of year when we get our monsoons. We'll have usually at least 4 days of straight rain, and quite often more than that. And this co-occurs with the continued melting of the glaciers in the mountains, so that not only is the earth saturated with water after a while, but also the rivers are just swollen from mountain fed water as well. And so we get flooding. The rivers and streams come up over their cut banks, move into the floodplain. Riparian forests, like this forest here, which occurs at the confluence of the St. Mary's and Old Man rivers, very famous camping ground and meeting spot for the Blackfoot tribes in the past. But these floods, they don't occur every year, but they occur fairly often. Sometimes they'll occur 2 and 3 years in a row. Other times there'll be a gap of a couple of years between a good flood, but they're needed. We couldn't maintain these riparian forests without them. It's part of the cottonwood seeding. So this is one of the sites that I spend some time at, usually in the summer, at the confluence here. It has a little bit of a different ecology than Spopeekimi, where I normally go. This is what it looks like when it's flooding down there in that forest. The forest just has kind of oxbows flowing through it, like this. You'll also see during this time, because of the saturation of the ground, you'll have landslides that occur as well. And these can be good opportunities as long as you don't get in the way of the landslide, but if you come across it after it happens, these can be good opportunities to access roots and things that are otherwise very difficult to dig later on in the summer. In fact, Misamsootaa is a really good time to dig roots because the ground is so moist, right? And if you can get the plant, especially before they flower, or as they're just starting to flower, then the roots are usually pretty good. Over towards Spopeekimi as well, we get the flooding there all the way along the river. This is, I think, the North Wood at Spopeekimi, just totally being flooded with the river water. This, I believe, is the Owl Wood. And, of course, the pond itself is fed by a spring, and so the water in the oxbow that I study at also rises. Doesn't bother the waterfowl any. Here you can see a family of Aapistsisskitsaato Canada geese, and their goslings, as you can see, are looking very goose-like now. They're just smaller than their parents, the 3 that are in the rears. Some goslings, or in Blackfoot Aapistsisskitsaato, some goslings are still fairly new to the world. You might have had the late nesters that nested on the islands in the second round after one couple had already successfully used them. So you can still have some very young goslings, but otherwise, most of them are starting to adopt the coloration, the plumage of their parents, and start to look like geese. and they can be fairly indistinguishable from their parents other than their size and watching their behaviors and such. There's always geese that waited too long, as I think I talked about in the previous lecture, and these nests will get flooded out. Mallards, Misamsootaa. In the previous lunar cycle, they were sitting eggs. Now we should start seeing the families around. These are some young mallards. One of the things that I like to pay attention to during this lunar cycle with the waterfowl is the way of their child rearing, the difference between how they rear their children. The geese, the Aapistsisskitsaato, of course, they stick together as families, with the gander maintaining his protective role, and they, show the goslings around and feed with them, and eventually teach them to fly. And once they've got it, they practice just briefly, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks. They practice, and then the families usually leave. The mallards, Misamsootaa, the drakes don't hang around. The fathers typically don't hang around with the mother with her brood. She's the one that takes care of them all summer. He rejoins her later on as the migration is going to get started. But at this time of the year, it's usually just the mother with her ducklings, and there's always a day where she leaves them. Okay? She leaves them to fend for themselves. And I noticed this, of course. I always notice there's a day, and they're about when they're this young. In fact, I think this little troop here probably, this was their day that they were being left alone. She comes and rejoins them, of course, but she puts them to a test, I think, okay, to see if they've got any skills. About a week and a half into their life, maybe. This is another mallard family, but you can see the ducklings are quite a bit older already in this lunar cycle. Their nesting coincides pretty closely with the geese. They're a couple weeks back from them. Here's the redheads, who we previously saw nesting in Aapistsisskitsaatos. And this is the redheads, ducklings, who were raised very much the way of the mallards, except she doesn't leave them alone. She doesn't give them that test that the mallard mother does. Redhead duck always sticks with her babies, watches them as they move in front of her, and she'll call them to her if there's danger. Aapistsisskitsaato, the coots, may still be sitting and incubating eggs during this lunar cycle, and the floods don't bother them. They just either build their nest higher or get it floating on its attachments to the reeds. You can see a nest that's had material added to it to lift it up above the flood. During the lunar cycle, at some point, these nests will hatch, and unlike the other waterfowl, coots, babies, are born, relatively defenseless, like helpless. They're not going to get out of the nest right away and go tooling around and start eating on their own. Their eyes are closed. They just can't do it. So a parent sticks with them at the nest for a bit as they're developing. And these parents will take turns, just as they did incubating the nest. One will go fetch food, bring it to the other who's sitting with the babies. And then they teach these chicks, they teach them how not to be greedy. what they do is they'll get a big mouthful of milfoil. One of the parents will get a big mouthful of milfoil and they'll offer to the chicks. But they'll just expect the chick to take a little bit, a little piece, and then allow the next chick to take a little piece, and then the next chick. Okay. If, on the other hand, one of the chicks gets greedy and if one of them gets kind of greedy and takes too much, then there's punishment for that, and the mother gets upset and she'll go chasing after them. They're a little bit too young for that in these particular images, but the one coming up, when they're starting to move off the nest and this feeding is still going on, you can see here's the mother coot really chasing down and biting and punishing one of the coots for taking too much of the milfoil from her mouth. Okay. There's a strong strong backlash against being greedy among the coots. And I don't know if that plays into the later pattern that I see toward the end of summer, but there is a time eventually when the American widgeons return, and when they return, the coot chicks, who are now almost adult size for the most part, they will dive down and get milfoil to feed the widgeons who can't dive themselves. So it's interesting, seeing these different patterns of child rearing. All of these ducklings and chicks and such are at danger in the waters, because these waters are thick with northern pike, a buckskeel, the freshwater sharks that they are. They eat a lot of the chicks, right? Summer, again, is always kind of the feast of babies. All the different species are eating off the eggs and newborns of the others. And northern pike is no exception. There's the beaver lodge in the midst of this flood. So what are the beavers up to? For the most part, their usual thing. They start eating milfoil at this time too. We'll see them eating other greens and roots. This, I believe, is some kind of a prickly lettuce or a sow thistle, perhaps. Lots of milfoil. They'll just grab some and they'll sit in the middle of the pond and munch, floating in the water. The floods, they love the floods because the floods allow them to go deep into into areas where they would normally have to canal and then risk some danger coming out on shore. So they get all over the wet meadows, up into the trees to access branches and stuff that they wouldn't normally be able to get very easily. Of course, they have to raise their house sometimes as the floodwater gets higher. Those on the river are not as fortunate. In fact, at Spobikimi, the ones on the river kind of threaten to invade the pond when the big floods come, because they've lost their homes and everything. And the river water is rushing and it's dangerous because there's lots of wood and stuff floating around. So I'll see on the banks evidence of beavers that have been coming over into the pond. And one time when I was there, I noticed that they kept a sentinel beaver at either end of the pond, at the south end and the north end, during the middle of the day. And I think this sentinel beaver was to meet others who were coming in. And in fact, I watched one come up over the levee and enter the pond, and he was met by the sentinel. And then the two of them kind of spun around each other a few times, smelling each other. And then the one who was new to the pond was allowed to pass. The other, who was sentinel, remained there and continued being sentinel. I also see that right before the big floods come, the beaver families at the pond will, at that extreme north and south end, they'll place scent mounds, okay, that that I believe warn other incoming beavers that this is territory that's already taken. Examining some of the floating pieces of dead wood and stuff in the water, you might find what looks like either a hatching of very small snails or some kind of barnacle growing on the wood. I've found this many times, and it is not advised to try to mess with these things, because what they are is they are the eggs of a giant water bug. And you can see the water bug mama hangs out underneath the log or the wood that the eggs are laid on. And she waits there to protect the eggs. And she carries quite a bite. One of the most painful insect bites, to my understanding. So if you touch her eggs, she'll come up just like that. Okay. The giant water bug. Lots of growth happening both in and out of the water. This is narrowleaf burr reed, which gets its seeds this time of year. You might also have wapato, which is a tuber, underwater aquatic tuber that was a food in the past. Among the birds, some are still nesting, some have their fledglings already. So red-winged blackbirds can be in either situation during this lunar cycle. They might even be, some of them, in their second, going into their second nesting. This is red-winged blackbird hatchlings in a Saskatoon plant, begging. Mama brings him all kinds of food. I've seen everything from spiders to worms, caterpillars, and of course damselflies and little dragonflies. This, I believe, is one of the spotted sandpiper babies. The catbirds, buka, will have nests during this lunar cycle. I often find them, this is right on top of some floating debris in the flood. They take advantage of it to find insects that were, clinging to this debris as life rafts. This is one of their babies, just newborn and bald. And you got to look closely, but this is a little catbird baby looking out from the nest, a little bit more developed. See lots of American goldfinch, though I don't find their nests. I think they do nest at Spobikimi. I'm just not familiar with their nests. I do find the nests of the yellow warbler, Aapistsisskitsaato. This is what it looks like. It incorporates a lot of the cotton from the trees, and the trees will shed their seeds during this lunar cycle, usually at the beginning of it as well. Here's what looking from the top of a yellow warbler's nest with its egg. Of course, the robins already have fledglings and might even start second nests at this time. This is a robin fledgling. Magpie fledglings are out and about with their families. Magpies only nest the one time during the summer season, and the rest of the time they are teaching their young ones. They stay with their families. The western kingbird, Aapistsisskitsaato, and I'm not quite sure what that means. It's something about his wing. Aapistsisskitsaato. I believe it's something about his wing. But the western kingbird, see them around some years. In the last few years, I haven't seen them at my site, and I don't know why. This year I saw one. It was the first one I've seen for a few years. Always there's brown thrashers around. Aapistsisskitsaato, which is the brown bird. Aapistsisskitsaato is a mimic. He's like a myna bird, so you can listen to him giving all kinds of calls of other birds that he's encountered in his life. The sapsuckers will be around and nesting. This is a red-naped sapsucker, which is more typical of the southern part of Blackfoot Range, and up toward where I am, I'm usually finding yellow-bellied sapsuckers. The white-tailed deer, like a lot of the birds, have their fledglings. You can see in the back, hidden in the grass, she's got a little fawn. And oftentimes you'll come across these fawn, and people get confused and they take them. They take them away, thinking that they're abandoned. But really, the mothers just leave them, and the fawn just sits still. You can go right up to it. It usually won't move. Okay? But the mothers they circle back around. So if you come across one, you should leave it. In the Blackfoot tradition, of course, these fawns were taken. Their robes are fancy, right? So they were used to make different decorated bags. Yeah, so this is the time of fawns. Among the plants, you'll have common mullein leaves getting pretty big, even bigger than this in a lot of cases. The yarrow, which we talked about during Aapistsisskitsaato, is a very important anti-inflammatory. In Blackfoot. Yarrow will be flowering now. You can also use the flowers in that anti-inflammatory poultice, as well as the leaves. Scarlet gaura will be around in bloom. I don't know any use for this plant, but it's there. At my site, I have several different types of grass. Creeping bent grass is one that goes into flower during this lunar cycle. Alnus brome as well. They get nice yellow flowers. This is their yellow flowering alnus brome. A little bit closer view of their flowers. Crested wheatgrass gets the purple flowers. Yellow sweet clover. These flowers have a nice, at one time in their development, it's not right away, right when they're first blooming, they don't taste so good, but if you give them a little bit of time to kind of mature as flowers, they get this nice vanilla taste. And so you can gather these flowers and dry them and use them for a vanilla flavored kind of a tea. The showy milkweed, Aapistsisskitsaato, that says something about the milk. Of course, if you snap the stem of this plant, you'll get that white latex type of fluid that comes out. This plant is poisonous to people, so you don't want to eat it. But it is an important plant to the monarch butterflies. It's their main food source, I believe. Aapistsisskitsaato, the wild licorice. Aapistsisskitsaato actually refers particularly to its burr, but it will be in flower and bloom at this time. I haven't found a bad time of year to pick this, the root of the wild licorice. It was used by the buffalo runners in the past as their kind of energy kick while they're doing their endurance running. Their power gel or what have you. But the root seems to be quality all year round. It's Canada anemone in the forest. I'll find these. Wild vetch will still be in bloom. It seems to be throughout the season it gets new blooms, the wild vetch. Star-flowered Solomon seal in the same forested areas will now have gone to fruit. These things taste terrible. I don't recommend eating them. Sometimes you come across something that looks like this, and this is a very ancient organism. It's called a yellow slime mold. Yeah, very ancient kind of an organism. It seems to erupt when we get so much moisture. Western tent caterpillars you may find at your site. These caterpillars are called gomoyokstokiks in Blackfoot, which means that they have funny ears. And there's a little song, Gomoyokstokina, 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 hoo, 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 Gomoyokstokina, Gomoyokstokina. And you'll get if you sing this and you kind of clap at the same time, you'll get the whole colony of tent caterpillars to be dancing in time and swaying back and forth. Wild asparagus, aka asparagus, has its berries now, and usually will also have the asparagus beetles around. And this is the time of year when they're mating, and so they mate right on the asparagus plants and lay their eggs right there. There's a beetle couple doing their thing. Lots of different insects are mating at this time. These are damselflies caught in their kind of heart-shaped mating pose. Got weevils on some of the rhombic leaf sunflower heads. They must like to lay their eggs on the sunflower, this particular weevil. Among the dragonflies, there's pale snake skins at my site, kind of a greenish yellow dragonfly. I might also find skeletonizing leaf beetles. These are just insects that I typically see this time of year. I don't know all of them. Like this butterfly, I don't know who this is. Unidentified as yet. Promachus robberfly is a really big, creepy fly. Some nice wasps. I don't know who this is, but very brilliant colored red and yellow wasp. Flathead borers. These are some of the beetles that are laying their eggs on the cottonwoods and poplars this time of year. These guys and the regular poplar borer beetles. The poplars and cottonwood, for their part, will shed their seeds, and this is usually early on in the lunar cycle. It might even start during the end of Aapistsisskitsaato, but it will definitely continue at least into the early part of Misamsootaa. And when they do shed the seeds, there's a lot of it around. This is the grass on, I think, on the golf course, just absolutely covered with the cottonwood seeds. There is a species that takes advantage of this because in the tops of the plants, this is like the tops of the old absinthe that catches a lot of this cotton in the air. And there is a spider whose name I don't really know, but who I have been calling over the years the absinthe spider. Although absinthe is not the only plant it uses, it's at my site, it's the main one. It weaves this web that looks very much like the cottonwood cotton that's caught in all the other plant tips, all the other old stem tips. But it's a trick, right? It's not really, there's a spider in there. And so this is very interesting to me because absinthe is a plant that actually was introduced here. So I have a question of whether these spiders just started using the absinthe, and they were here in the ecosystem doing this, timing their big web weaving with the cottonwoods forever, or whether they're something that came in with the absinthe and are taking advantage of this. Either way, it's a very neat kind of relationship to talk about, especially in terms of like people talk about invasive species and these kind of things, noxious weeds, and absinthe could be one of those that people think that way about very easily. But as we can see, there's a whole complex relationship in the ecosystem that plays out with these plants, right? So they're fitting in better than most of the introduced humans, at least. So I always look forward to seeing these spiders every year. I don't know if this is on a clematis plant. I see this come around in Misamsootaa, but I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's a fungus. I don't know whether it's insect eggs, a gall, or what. Lots of activity by the snakes. This is a wandering garter snake. It's pretty much the most common snake at my site, but I also have bullsnakes and plains garter snakes and prairie rattlesnakes. All of them this time of year are moving toward their mating season. They might even be mating at this time, and then and then those who aren't, or even those who are also hunting. Right, so I find them a lot of times on the prowl, and I like to watch the wandering garter snakes because every once in a while they catch a mouse. This guy has just eaten a mouse, and you can see how fat he is. One of the debates that goes on in the scientific community and the herpetological community is whether or not these snakes are constrictors. A lot of people believe that the wandering garter snake is a constrictor, unlike other garter snakes that just don't have the muscles to do that. I do believe the wandering garter snake myself is a constrictor because I grew up raising constrictors, boa constrictors, and I've watched wandering garter snakes constrict mice. And although some of the herpetologists in the other camp will say that really that mouse is just being held, and that there's a kind of a venom in the gums of the wandering garter snake that numbs the mouse and so that it eventually stills and can be eaten. It's not actually being constricted. And I agree that these snakes do have a venom that will numb it, because I've been bit plenty of times on my fingers and tested it. It does make you go numb a little bit, like on the finger that I get bitten on, right? Certainly could affect a mouse. But I believe I see the snakes actually working their body in the constriction, and the mouse behaving like a constricted mouse. You know, sometimes they'll shit themselves and this kind of a thing. Eyes bulge. So I still believe that they're constricting, even though they're no doubt using their venom as well. In the forest, you might see owlets out in training for hunting with their parents. They'll always be with their parents, so keep a lookout for mom and dad as well. Here's one of the parents, Kakanoot in Blackfoot. They're calling them meager ears, little ears, which is actually the reverse of what they have. Up in the sky, you might see the mating displays of pistu, the common nighthawk. And it has a sound display in the sky that, in Blackfoot, this is why it's given the name pistu, which means a fart, because it makes a sound that's associated with a fart, that's reminiscent of a fart to Blackfoot listeners. And it plays a role in one of the classic stories, the Napi story about Napi and the rock. And this was the time when Napi was traveling around with a pet fox, and he was wearing this heavy buffalo robe, and it was hot, and he wanted to get rid of it. It's probably this time of the year sometime. It's getting too hot to be wearing a buffalo robe. So they've come across this big rock out on the prairie, and Napi thinks, oh, this is my chance. So he makes this big, grand, speech to the rock about how, he feels so bad for him because he's out here naked on the prairie. And, he can't stand to see him suffer like this, so he's going to give up his robe to the rock. Okay? And so he puts his robe on the rock, and him and the fox go on their way. And Napi's feeling good about himself. He's done something generous. But as they go along, pretty soon the storm front kicks up. The cumulus clouds, the typical weather of this time of year, start getting the thunder coming in. And along with that, there's winds, and Napi realizes would be good to have that robe. So he tells his pet fox, go back to the rock and get my robe back. So the fox runs back and tells the rock, yeah, Napi wants his robe back. The rock tells him, well, no, he can't have his robe back. He gave it to me. He gives something, then it's mine. Right? So the fox goes back to Napi and says, the rock won't give it up. He says, it's his. You gave it to him. So Napi's like, what do you mean the rock won't give it up? It's a rock. You just take it. Napi goes marching back there himself, walks up to the rock and says, sorry, rock, I need my robe. Takes it, starts walking away. And then behind him, he hears this sound, this, crunching and this loud sound. And he looks, and the rock starts moving, starts rolling his way. And Napi picks up his pace a little bit. This is creeping him out, and the rock just continues to roll, and it's moving faster, okay? And it's chasing him. So Napi starts running. The rock is rolling after him. This is a huge rock. We're talking a rock the size of a house, a modern-day house. It's chasing after him. And Napi comes across this long-legged bear. Tells the bear, can you stop the rock? Can you stop the rock? It's after me, right? So the bear goes and he tries to meet the rock and stand up on his hind legs and put his front paws on it and stop it, but the rock just rolls over him and squishes his legs short and hunches his back, and this is how the grizzly bear comes to have his particular shape that he has now, compared to what the bear was during the Pleistocene. Next, Napi comes across this giant bison, and he asks it to help him stop the rock, and the bison tries to headbutt the rock, but again the rock just smashes him and pushes his hump up, shoves his head down, and shortens his hind legs and rolls on. Becomes the giant bison, becomes the bison that we know. Next, there's this elk, has these forward-facing antlers. Napi asks for help, and the elk rams the rock, and it just shoves his antlers back sideways to the shape that they are now. Then Napi comes across Bistu on her nest, sitting on her nest, so I guess it would have been a little bit later in the summer. She's not nesting yet in Misamsootaa. She's sitting on her nest, and she has two hatchlings. And Napi asks her to help, and she says, well, if you'll sit here and watch my hatchlings, I'll go see what I can do about the rock. So she flies off, leaving Napi as the babysitter. And when she gets over the rock, she dives and she poops. And you can hear that farting sound that's made during their mating display now. She poops on the rock, and every time she poops on the rock, a little piece of the rock breaks off. And she poops and poops and poops, and eventually the rock breaks in half, and it comes to a halt. That rock is now up at Ohkotok, in a little bit north of here in Alberta, just south of Calgary. So the Bisto had stopped the rock, but meanwhile, babysitter Napi was looking at her hatchlings and the way that they were begging to him, and he thought, gee, they got funny mouths. I bet that could make them even look funnier. So he starts pulling at their beaks until their mouths rip way back, and he's getting a good laugh out of it. But then he sees Mama flying back, and Napi's like, uh-oh, I'm going to be in trouble. So he takes off running, runs for the river, and dives in and just has his lips up at the surface of the water, breathing like a snorkel. And Mama Nighthawk flies above the river, sees where he is, aims, dives, poops right in the mouth. So Swanson's hawk, one of the most prolific hawks in my area. Sikpoyetapanikim is its Blackfoot name, and that means the black greasy hawk, but it's really talking about a certain dark morph of this hawk. Okay? They will already have nests and usually already have fledglings in this lunar cycle. Definitely toward the end of the cycle they'll have their fledglings. There's a parent sitting up above the nest at the pond, and a look at the fledglings who are just able now to start peeking over the nest. Up on the coulee flats in the short grass prairie, some of the foods become available. This is an area where you can see the white flowering of wild onions, prairie onions, Misamsootaa, the fancy berry, and Blackfoot. They're very easy to dig. The bulb is not far underground, and you can get a lot of them quickly. When you dig them, if you dig them, and you want to store them, like you want to preserve some of them, don't clean them. Okay? Hardly, just barely knock the dirt off of them, but don't take the husk off of the bulb. Don't take the flower off of the stem. Leave the whole thing intact, just like this. This is how they'll be stored in order to be maintained, through the winter. Just like this. Just tie them together in a bundle and stash them somewhere. Otakots is the prickly pear cactus. We talked about that in the last lunar cycle. During Misamsootaa, it starts to flower. It's really nice big yellow flowers. Same as the ball cactus. Ball cactus gets these red flowers also during this lunar cycle. Because we're getting so much rain, of course, this brings out the fungi. So we get the giant puffball mushroom, called kakatotsi, or stars in Blackfoot. And this name, kakatotsi, comes from the story of Tailfeather's woman, Soatsaki, who married the star, had a baby, and brought her baby back down to earth when she came down with her star baby, and she was told not to let it touch the ground, because if it touched the ground it would feel heavy and it would want to go back up in the sky. So she always kept him in a hammock, and those hammocks are still used, by the way, by Blackfoot people. The old style hammock has been adapted to the modern house for babies. And her mother one day was babysitting the boy and decided that it was cruel that her daughter never let him crawl around, so she put him on the ground. Immediately he started screaming and crying. So she lifted him back up, tucked him back into the hammock, and when her daughter came home and lifted the covers back, all there was a puffball mushroom in the place where the baby was. And in the sky that night, the hole that she'd come down from with the baby from the sky world was filled by a new star called Katapaopi. That's the North Star, the one that doesn't move. Puffball mushrooms are edible. They weren't really part of the Blackfoot diet. I don't know that there was any fungus that was a usual part of the diet, at least not in the memory. And, a lot of the diet, I believe, changed after the introduction of the horse and the rifle. It became much more probably bison-centric than it was in the past. I think people would have used the diversity food and possibly the puffball mushrooms. I'm not sure. But yeah, when they haven't gone to spore yet, when they're white like this inside, this is the time when they're good to eat. Fairy ring mushrooms are really the best mushrooms in our territory, in Blackfoot territory, in terms of taste and in terms of preservability. And they're very easy to identify because they grow in a circle, right, in the ring. And so you can pull these. They dry very easy. They rehydrate very good, very well. And as far as mushrooms taste, these are pretty tasty. Scarlet mallow, Aapistsisskitsaato flower. We noted when the greens were emerging in the previous lunar cycle. Now that they're in flower, I guess I'll tell you a little bit of something about them. This plant was known as for its use by Aapistsisskitsaato, or healers, who would perform miracles while they were healing. And one of the things that they were able to do, they did with this plant, apparently. This is what's at least been documented in ethnobotanies, although I've found them to be full of errors, right? But this plant, apparently you can chew up the greens, which I've tried before, and then spit on your hands, and it does produce this kind of a coating over your skin, a mucusy kind of a coating over your skin, but it's transparent. And with this on your skin, the Aapistsisskitsaato of the past used to be able to reach inside of boiling water and grab things out, instruments that they were going to use in their healing. Now, I haven't been so brave as to try that. But that's what they say that this plant was used for in the past. This is black medic, very tiny, probably the most tiny little clover in our area. Wild morning glories, which we mentioned in the previous lunar cycle, are still blooming as, this is butte marigold. I don't know if we talked about that one yet, but just a member of the aster family that's pretty prolific. Wild blue flax all around, and look kind of close look-alike, the blue-eyed grass. Okay. Got blanket flowers still in bloom, as they were the previous moon. Got western wood lilies now, as well as glacier lilies, which in Blackfoot are called namoikin. Namoikin, it's like, I don't know if it means bee tooth or what. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not sure what the meaning is, but this is an edible. This has an edible bulb. It kind of reminds me of rice cakes, but if rice cakes were moist and cool. Longleaf sage, one of the different sage plants that's around, and a lot of times during Misamsootaa, these sage plants will start to be infested by aphids, which you can see as black parts near the stem of the plant in this image. Here's a close-up of some of the aphids underneath the stem. A lot of times these aphids are being herded by ants. The ants are using them like cattle, and they take the aphids' poops, nectar, bring it back to feed their babies in the colony. But these ants will attack you if you're trying to mess with the aphids, and they'll attack other insects doing so as well. So wavy leaf thistle, another one that gets fairly aphid infested at this time of year. All thistles are edible, however, their root in particular, however, you need to roast it, because there is a kind of a bacteria that grows with the root. And that bacteria will make you really sick, and I say this from experience of pulling a thistle root out of the ground and just eating it without cooking it, and I was sick for the next 48 hours. You have to cook it. You can see some ants working some aphids on this one. Also being visited by a little wasp flower. Some of the different milk vetch that's out still. This is the Drummond's milkvetch still in bloom. Narrowleaf milkvetch, kind of running out of flowers now. Two groove milkvetch, still very much in bloom. There's a whole bunch of it. Missouri milkvetch will still be in bloom. We talked about that last time. It's Missouri milkvetch again. Some of them will start getting seed pods on them. The ones that I look for are the ground plum, which are called in Blackfoot Aapistsisskitsaato and snake food. These are really good little fruits. You know, for the most part, you stay away from eating anything vetchy because it has locoweed in that family, and it's got, you know, lots of different poisonous species. But the ground plums, they're very unique looking, and they taste really good, and they have nothing wrong with them eating them. They taste kind of like, to me, kind of like a bell pepper. Indian breadroot, like I was saying earlier, the ground is moist. Might as well pick some roots, especially before they really start flowering out. It's a young guy that I was training, Darien, with a couple of mott's roots. These roots were the potato of the past. They're what the potato has replaced in people's diet here. But women would gather many of these every year to keep their family in those carbohydrates and those starches for the year, right? You need these for energy. It's the alfalfa, in bloom all over the place, like the sweet clovers. Silvery lupine, down in the forests. Oatseek and your buffalo beans now have their beans on them. Don't let children eat these, even if they look like peas and poisonous. Shrubby cinquefoil, this big plant in bloom, as well as the yellow umbrella plants. Lots of different flowers still going on in this cycle. Aapistsisskitsaato, which means the kind of a glue flower, prairie cone flower. It's a sticky resinous cone. Oftentimes I find these really neat little yellow ambush bugs on them. It's a hairy golden aster. It's going to be one of our last flowering plants of the year, actually. Already in bloom by the end of Misamsootaa. That's it for the long rains. Of course, there's lots of other things that are happening, but these are some of the key things that I've paid attention to, and a little bit of the Blackfoot lore associated with some of them. Again,